All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Today we have Sara Skowronski, who is the Principal Consultant and CEO of EOS Human Resources Consulting, and she has updates on new laws in 2021 that we should be aware of, which we thought would be great for the Chamber to hear an update on. And then, of course, if anyone has questions for her, we can do Q&A at the end, and then we'll send out contact information if anyone has questions. So we'll send all of that information afterwards, and we will also have this on Facebook Live, so it'll live there as well, so people can catch the recording of this. If they have any questions or want to watch it at a later date, that is available too. So Sara, why don't you take it away?
Great, thank you so much for having me. And I am going to go over the laws, the new laws that came out this year, as Melissa said, but I am also going to talk a little bit about just strategies overall in managing through this very challenging time that we call the 2020s of life. So as she said, my name is Sara Skowronski. I am the Principal Consultant at EOS Human Resources Consulting. We've been in business for 7 years, and we focus on managing the HR functions for small businesses and acting as that HR department when a company doesn't have the resources to have a full-time HR person on staff. And part of what I've found so important is that if you have an employee, you have to know something about HR. And so we're going to talk a little bit about HR compliance, just some really basic 101 HR compliance things. We'll talk about some COVID updates, things that are going on now that ARPA has been passed, and what does that look like and what does that mean? New laws for 2021, and then really taking all of the requirements and the legalities and compliance and how to really manage for success with your employees. So when we talk about HR compliance, this is when we're talking about laws, policies, and payroll. And these are the things that you don't want to get wrong, because it can cost you a lot of money, both in time and in actual managing of the process, and actual paying the fines and fees. So the laws I want to talk about specifically are employee versus independent contractor. This is a huge hot topic for us in California. There's been a lot of new laws going on. When you have, basically what the state wants you to do is, if you have somebody working for you in any capacity, they're going to assume that that person is an employee versus an independent contractor. And they had the 8-point checklist that you could go through, and now they've gone to what's called an ABC rule. And really what that boils down to is if the person is doing the business of the business. So if you are a graphic designer and you have somebody who is doing design work for you, then that person is doing the business of the business. Now, for us as HR consultants, we're generally doing something that's sort of outside of the business of the business. And so we come in and so if you have somebody who's coming in who's not doing anything to do with your business and what you're producing, then that might be considered an independent contractor. The other thing is, if this person has their own business, are you the only person that they're doing this for, or is this something that that they have many clients that they're working with? And so it's really important to make sure that you are categorizing people correctly in this employee versus independent contractors, because the way that the state looks at it is that they really want to make sure that they are receiving their funds, their taxes. And if you do not categorize somebody correctly, and for some reason somebody goes back and is auditing this for some reason, and they find or determine that somebody is actually an employee, then you could be responsible not only for your portion of the taxes, but for that employee's portion of the taxes. So it's very important to look at everybody. I know it's very easy and everybody wants to say, oh, this person is only working for me for a couple hours a week or a couple hours a month. I'm just going to make them an independent contractor. And so we really want to make sure that you understand that even if they're only working for you 2 hours a week, if they don't meet those independent contractor criteria, then they're an employee and you really should be categorizing them as that. The other big major law that a lot of people get confused by is the exempt versus non-exempt. And when we talk about exempt and non-exempt, that has to do with whether they're exempt from being paid overtime. And there is a difference between being exempt and being salaried. And a lot of people get that confused. They say, well, I pay somebody a salary and therefore I don't have to pay them overtime. And that's not the case. Again, there are rules and there are guidelines of what classifies somebody as an exempt employee. And an exempt employee is somebody who is either managing other employees or has a high level of professional, a high professional level, such as somebody who is licensed, like an engineer or an architect or a doctor. Those people are exempt. But if you have somebody who is just doing work for you and is not managing other people, most of the time that's going to be a non-exempt employee. And with that comes rules around tracking hours, tracking overtime, tracking lunch and meal and rest breaks. All of those things are required with a non-exempt employee. And again, a lot of people choose to make people exempt or make people salary because they don't want to have to track all those things. It becomes tedious and overwhelming to do that. Unfortunately, if you don't have that documentation to back up why you paid somebody or how you paid somebody, then an employee could come back and say, hey, I worked 10 hours a day and I never took a break and I never received overtime. And now the employer is on the hook for not only those hours, but penalties in the form of an hour per hour for every, like 1 hour for every time that a meal or a rest break was missed, late payment fees, which could be up to 30 days of wages for an employee. So it can become very costly. The other thing with both of these, both the independent contractor and the non-exempt employees, there's something called a PAGA claim, which I'm not going to go into too much detail except to say that an employee could bring a class action against an employer. So if one employee says, this is happening to me, and so I'm going to file a claim on behalf of all of the employees that work here, you could have somebody who's not only looking at that one employee, but also looking at your entire workforce and examining whether everybody was treated properly and categorized properly. So starting off with the scary stuff, but those are really important and can be very time consuming and very costly to try and defend any type of legal action against that. The next thing is required documents. California has a number of documents that we are required to give to employees when they start working with us. One of those is for non-exempt employees. It's a notice, a wage notice, and it basically lays out, it's similar to an offer letter that lays out what their hourly rate is, what their overtime and double time rate is. And that actually needs to be given to an employee not only when they're first hired, but also every time you make a change to their compensation. And so it's important that you have that document, as well as the I-9, which needs to be filled out by both the employee and the employer within 3 days of hire. And when we're doing audits for our clients and we're looking at their I-9s, a lot of times there are fields that are missed on that. And again, the government loves to come in sometimes and find ways to ding you and to charge you and to get money out of things. So what we try to do is make sure that people understand all the different fields that need to be completed on an I-9 and how important it is that they're completed so that you are not at risk of having to pay a fine for not only for each one that's incorrect, but each field that's incorrect. So, so it's really important that you have those documents filled out correctly. The other one at the end of employment that's required is a notice of what type of termination it was. What was the last day? Did they receive all of their compensation? And why were they terminated? This is something that can be used to defend against unemployment claims as well. So if somebody resigns from employment and you have it documented that they resigned and they go and try and file an unemployment claim, then they can come, you can go back and actually say, no, we resigned, and they do have this document for that. The last area of the laws is the leave of absence. And this is becoming more important to know about. Up until this year, employers who had 5 or more employees were required to offer pregnancy disability leave to employees who needed to take that. Now, as of 2021, they have actually expanded the California Family Rights Act, which is the mirror of the Family Medical Leave Act, which allows employees who meet certain eligibility to take up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave. And this has now gone down to employers with 5 or more employees. So that expands that leave to a larger number. And we'll go a little bit more into that when we talk about the new laws for 2020. But there's also a number of other leaves that you need to provide to employees, such as time off for voting or sick leave. And sick leave is another one that varies not only within the state, but city by city. There are 4 cities on the closer to the Bay side of the East Bay that have very specific sick leave laws. And so you want to make sure that if you have employees who are working in any of those cities, and now that we have employees who are working remotely, we need to be looking at where is the employee actually working, because it's not necessarily based on where the office location is. It's based on where the employee is working. So if your office is based in Concord, but you have employees who are living in Berkeley or in Emeryville, then you need to be aware of these things as well, and how all of these things play in together. So overall, there are a lot of laws and a lot of nuances to HR laws in California, and it's just, I just want to iterate how important it is to make sure that you are looking at what is the best practice for your organization, for your employees, and for your business. So the next thing I want to talk about is policies, and 3 different areas on this. One is the employee handbook, and this creates a baseline. And a lot of people ask, do we really need to have an employee handbook? Do we need to have, this 50-page employee handbook? And my answer is that, it depends. It's, HR is very close to legal. And so a lot of our answers are, it depends. But the employee handbook is that baseline, and it's a place where you can make sure that you have documented, this is how we're always going to handle a policy, or this is how we handled it in the past and how we're going to do it in the future, or this is what the law is. And so this way you have something where you can always refer back to. Even with our clients, we go through all of the policies and we make sure we know what is the policy for that client. And then when an employee asks us a question, we go back to their handbook and say, what was their policy? What did they say they wanted to do? The other thing is, a lot of policies are written because somebody does something and now you have to write a policy about it. Whether it's, generally it's somebody does something stupid and now you have to write a policy about you don't need to, you should not be doing this. You need to wear clothes in the office. You cannot come in your bathing suit. Whatever the stupid thing is that they're doing, you need to make sure that you have that outlined. And I have written handbooks, and then I've expanded on handbooks based on specifically what people are doing that 90% of the people out there would consider common sense. But those 10% who somehow have come into your workforce, now you need to make sure that it's written out in black and white what you expect of them. So that's the overall handbook policies. So it could be something very basic if you feel like you have a workforce that you can convey the information in a very simple and basic way, or you may have to get more detailed and have everything written out in detail. The next thing I want to talk about is the time off policies. And so in general, we're talking about vacation, sick leave, and paid time off. And it's important to make sure that you have these policies written down so that there's no confusion about who gets what. And it could be that you write it in an offer letter. It could be that you have an overarching policy for all employees, but you want to make sure that people know what those policies are. When we're talking about vacation, sick leave, and time off, vacation and time off are considered compensation in California. And so what that means is that once somebody accrues that, they have earned that and it is theirs. And so it's important to make sure that if they leave the company, that you are paying that out to them at the time of that they leave. Sick leave is what is required by law, that you give them at least the minimum amount of sick leave, but you do not need to pay out sick leave at the time of dismissal. Paid time off is a combination of vacation and sick leave, which means that it can cover the sick leave requirements. You can use that to cover the sick leave requirements. However, you will have to pay it out. And so these are things that you want to make sure that you're considering when you're coming up with your policies and when you're coming up with time off policies, is what's the end game? What's going to happen at the end? And are you prepared to pay that out if somebody is not taking time off and they leave the company? The other thing to keep in mind is that vacation and paid time off are not required by law. You do not have to offer anybody time off. Paid time off. The only paid time off that you have to offer is sick leave. And so again, you need to make the decision based on your company, your culture, who your competitors are in terms of who's hiring your employees, and what do you need to do to attract those employees to work with you. But you want to make sure that you have a policy in place that defines all of these things so that it's clear what you're offering and when they can take it. And then the last area with policies is things that will protect your business. Making sure that you have things to cover non-disclosure so that people aren't taking information from your business and going to either another company or starting their own business and using that information. Any intellectual property, making sure if somebody creates something, whatever they're creating, whether it's a widget or a process flow, making sure that it is defined that intellectual property is the property of the company if they made it while they were working for the company. And then the last thing is physical property, making sure that if you are providing equipment to them, or if you're providing a workspace to them, that they are taking care of that they're not being destructive to that, and that they're responsible for that. Payroll is another really important thing to make sure that you're keeping track of. Again, we talked at the beginning about exempt and non-exempt employees. Non-exempt employees have to track their hours and should record all of the hours that they worked and when they started and stopped any meal breaks. They don't need to record rest breaks, but they need to be given the option to take those because rest breaks are paid time while meal breaks are unpaid time. It's important that they're marking down as close to accurately when they started. If somebody were to look at a time card and it said that they worked from 8 to 5 every day and they took their meal break from 12 to 12:30 every day, it's going to look suspicious, because as much as we would try, it's really hard to say, oh yes, I showed up here exactly at 8 o'clock every day and I left exactly at 5 o'clock every day. So there should be some realistic numbers in there. A lot of times if you're using an online timekeeping system, that's the best way to make sure that they're clocking in and out appropriately. For overtime, you want to make sure that everybody is being paid correctly for their overtime. Remember, in California, we have daily overtime, so that's 8 hours in a day or 40 hours in a week. And we have what's called 7-day pay. So if they work for 7 days straight, the 7th day is automatically overtime, regardless of how many hours they worked throughout the week. There's a number of other overtime stipulations that you need to be aware of. And so making sure that you're paying people correctly. A lot of time, payroll systems and timekeeping systems are set up for California. So as long as they're tracking their time appropriately, it should automatically do that. But ultimately, it is a responsibility of the employer, not the timekeeping system and not the payroll system, to make sure that the overtime is calculated correctly. The missed break penalty, I talked about, if somebody were to come back and say they didn't get their breaks and they wanted to get paid out for that time. Basically, anytime somebody is not allowed to take a uninterrupted 30-minute meal break and at least a minimum of a 10-minute rest break per the requirements, which is if they've worked over 4 hours, or if they're scheduled to work 4 hours, they should have a rest break. If they're scheduled to work 6 hours, they should have a meal break, and then 8 hours. So every 4 hours, they should get a rest break. If they don't receive that, then the employer, let me rephrase that. If they are not allowed to take that. So if you allow them to take that, you allow them the opportunity to take that, and for whatever reason they choose not to, it's important to have that documented that they chose not to take that. If they are not allowed to, like you get really busy or they can't take it at the beginning of the 5th hour because, I don't know, maybe you receive shipments and a shipment comes in right at the beginning of their 5th hour. So they're not allowed to take that because they have to unload that shipment. Then you're responsible for paying them 1 hour of regular pay as a missed break penalty. And while a lot of people get aggravated that they have to do this, it is much less expensive to pay 1 hour for missed break penalty than it is to pay all of the fees and fines that may come later on. So we just want to make sure that you're minimizing costs and that you're keeping in compliance with things. And then the last thing I'll cover on payroll is pay stubs. There are actually 10 items that are required to be on your pay stub. And this is a California requirement. It's not a national requirement. So it's important to make sure that your pay stub is in compliance, because again, it is not the responsibility of the payroll company. It is a responsibility of the employer to make sure that the paycheck stub is correct. And a lot of these things are basic. Things like the employee's full name, the last 4 digits of the social security number, the hours that they worked, the hourly rate for hourly employees, but other things, other nuances, like that you need to show their sick accrual, that needs to be printed somewhere, whether it's on a pay stub or it's given to them with their pay stub. It needs to be given to them each pay period. You need to have the legal name of the company on there. So make sure that that's correctly on there. So all these little nuances, and again, these are these tiny little things that can cost a lot of money if somebody were to look at all of your employees and all of your records. So you want to make sure that you have all of those things in place. All right, so going into COVID-19, so the first thing I want to cover is the FFCRA. So that was the Family First Coronavirus Response Act that was originally set up in April, just about a year ago, April 2020. And it offered leave for, it offered 10 days of leave to employees who were taking care of themselves or a family member who either had COVID or were exposed to COVID. And then there was the additional extended family leave, which was for people who had to deal with distance learning and childcare. These were paid leaves, and it was reimbursed through payroll deductions. As of January 1st, that's no longer a requirement for employers. And I'd also want to say on the federal level, this is for employers with 500 or less employees. California has added their own version of this, which covers the 500 and more employees. The differences with the going forward is that California now requires this. Under the federal law, it's optional, but California does require this for employers with 25 or more employees. So I give you a lot of information in there. Let me say that one more time. The FFCRA is not required. It is an opt-in as of January 1st. California has passed their own law that says if you have 25 or more employees, basically you still have to offer this option. The new under ARPA, under the new plan that came out in the last month, the FFCRA has expanded. So, and as such, so has the California version, so that that time off can be used not only if you have COVID or if you've been exposed to COVID, but also if you need to get a vaccine or if you're requiring employees to get a vaccine, they can use that time to get paid for that time. As well as if they have a reaction to the vaccine and they need to take time off because they're sick. So you can use that time. And it does, the new one does reset as of April 1st under FFCRA. So you can reset that. And if somebody was sick before or it took time off because they were in quarantine and now they have to take time off because they got sick from the vaccine, they can do that again. The clock has reset for them. The next thing is on workers' comp. In California, any COVID related illness is presumed to be work related. And if there are, which means that they're assuming that if somebody gets COVID, they got it at work, if they're in a work environment, if they're in the office. And so it's important to make sure that you're treating it as a workers' comp claim and that you're submitting those cases appropriately. There are stipulations on if one person is sick, you don't necessarily have to report it to Cal OSHA, but if you have multiple people getting sick, then Cal OSHA needs to be notified. And then the last one, I believe the PPP round 2, I know that the deadline is looming if it hasn't already passed on that. So just make sure, I've seen a lot of things come out that there was still funds in that. So people are encouraged to apply for that if they're eligible. All right, all of that. And now we get to the new laws. So that was all what was already in place. And so now, as I said, the California Family Rights Act, which is CFRA or CFRA, was originally set up for employers with 50 or more employees. As of January 2021, that now has extended to employers with 5 or more employees. And what this offers is, in order to be eligible for this, an employee needs to have worked for the company for a year and has worked at least 1,250 hours. This is basically they have to have worked part-time for a year. They would be eligible for up to 12 weeks of unpaid time. This is not paid. And to cover anything for their own medical needs or anybody in their immediate family if they needed to take care of that. There are a lot more stipulations, and so if somebody comes and says they need to take an extended period of time off, make sure you're looking at if they're eligible for CFRA. you want to make sure that you're following the rules for it. There's a lot of documentation and a lot of notices that need to be given to employees about their rights with this. So you want to make sure that you're going through that process with them if anybody's asking for extended time. The second thing is this actually went into effect in it went into law a couple of years ago. They kept pushing out the date, but as of January 2021, all employers with 5 or more employees need to have both the employee and the supervisor go through harassment prevention training. For the employee, it is a 1-hour training, and for the supervisor, it is a 2-hour training. And they need to do this training every 2 years, and it needs to be done for new employees within the first 6 months of employment. So this is something you want to make sure that if you're hiring, if you have more than 5 employees, if you're hiring people, you get them through the training as quickly as possible, so that they can and then track that, so that in the future you know when they need to redo that training. There were some expanded protections for victims of crimes, including making sure that people are allowed to take time off to go to court to deal with any legal issues around if they're a victim of a crime. And then the last one, this is a real nuance of the law. Rest breaks before 2020. You can actually require that an employee stay on site and stay nearby when they're taking a rest break. As of the beginning of 2021, you cannot require that. Rest breaks can be taken off site, and so you can't stop somebody from doing that. All right, and then the last section I just want to talk about is managing for success. And really, this is about setting expectations, having deliberate communication, and managing remote workers. And when we talk about setting expectations, what I want to make sure is that people are being specific. I have so many clients who, when they say somebody isn't doing what they want them to do, and I ask, have you told them? They say no. They've had this job title before, they should know. Every job is different. Every company is different. Everybody does things differently. Everybody's expectations are different. It is extremely important to be as specific as possible and to take a step back before you go into a disciplinary mode. Make sure that you actually say and document. HR loves documentation. So make sure you say this to them, and then you document that you have said this to them, exactly what you want them to do. Don't assume that your employee is going to interpret or is going to guess what it is that you want them to do. Make sure you say exactly. And if they are doing something wrong, make sure that you correct that action. Once you've corrected that action, once you've set that expectation, now you can manage to that. Now you can say, okay, I've already told you this is how I want you to make the widget, and you're not making the widget this way. And so now we have to go into a disciplinary mode. But before you get there, make sure that they know exactly what you expect of them. Be deliberate about your communication. Make sure that people know when the rules of engagement, when to communicate, how to communicate, where to communicate. Are you a company that you do everything face-to-face? And so they need to, when you're talking to them, it needs to be either on the phone that you're actually talking, or is everything done by email, or is everything done by text or Slack? Whatever that is, make sure that you know what is expected of them. Know the goals. Who's responsible for what? What authority do they have to make decisions? If things are going up or going wrong or going sideways, who's responsible for pulling things back to the schedule? And then making sure you're following up. So especially if you're setting expectations for somebody, making sure that you're holding them accountable for that. Talk to them about why they did something wrong and what they've learned from that, and how they can correct that going forward. And then making sure that if somebody's not available to do something, that you know who is the next person in line to be available to do that. And then the last thing is about managing remote teams. This is, become a regular part of life for us. And if you're going to continue to allow employees to work remotely, it's important for you to be successful with that, that you set some guidelines around how you're managing them. So there has to be a level of trust. You have to know that that they're going to do what you need them to do, which again goes back to setting expectations. But also encourage you to make sure you're results focused. Managing remote teams is not so much about, people in seats. It's about making sure that the work gets done. So what is it that you need to make sure gets done? And does that have to be done between certain hours, or can there be more flexibility in the hours and that people are working? And then again, defining lanes of responsibility and authority, making sure that people know what they need to do and who's responsible for it. And if somebody else is veering into somebody's lane of responsibility, making sure that that person who is responsible for it has the authority to say, hey, I'm responsible for this. I am working on this. You stay in your lane, I'll stay in mine. And that way people know and trust each other, goes back to that trust, that they can actually get their work done, be focused on the results. All right, so before I go, I wanted, before I open it up to questions, I just wanted to let everybody know that we are in the process of setting up a field guide for your first hire. So if you or somebody you know is getting ready to hire your first employee, probably about midsummer, we'll be launching a course that digs in deep to a lot of these laws, as well as a lot of best practices for managing your first employee. And if you're interested in finding out more about that, you can go to go.eoshr.com/field guide and sign up, and you'll get notification about that in the future. But with that, I wanted to thank you all for your time. And I did also want to mention the last slide we talked about was the managing remote employees. An associate of mine and I actually did a whole webinar series last summer called Remote Strong. And if you're interested in digging deeper into managing remote employees, you can go to our YouTube page and view those videos as well. With that, I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Sarah, for the presentation. If anyone has any questions, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask Sarah, or you can put it in the chat and I can read it as well.
Hey, Sarah, thank you so much. I heard you kind of mention it a couple times about, the amount of employees in your organization, how there's, different rules for, say, under 10 or 5 employees compared to, but with payroll and, time off and meal break penalties, it doesn't matter how many employees you employ, right?
Correct. You can have just one employee. The sick leave is for any number of employees, and any payroll laws are for any number of employees. Yes.
And then, but some of the trainings and all of that stuff, like harassment and those types of things, is that,
harassment training is for 5 or more employees. A lot of the leaves like pregnancy, disability, and CFRA, those are for 5 employees or more. And so a lot of the leaves sort of start at around 5 or more. But yeah, it's different. There's sort of a 5, 15, 25 thresholds. But yeah, there's a lot of different ones.
Yeah.
Sarah, does it matter full-time, part-time? Every employee is a number?
Every employee is a number when it comes to that. Yeah.
Thank you.
And Sarah, this also includes if you're paying yourself, you're an employee, right? So 5 including
Yes.
you. Yep.
Yeah, if you're set up as an employee, yes.
Yep. Did want to do a shout out for Sarah's Remote Strong series. Definitely was very useful for me when I was watching it back when, May, April, June?
I think we
Somewhere.
started it in May. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. So
Thank you.
highly recommend.
Are there any other questions? No?
I have another question, Sarah.
Yeah.
When you were talking about people working in certain areas, let's say I have a person that is going on site, let's say to Oakland or something like that. They're going to be there for however many hours doing work. Do the Oakland laws, as far as wages, et cetera, apply to that employee then?
If it's only for a short amount of time, and I have to double check, if it's over 2 days, but I have to double check. But if they have over a certain amount of time, then yes, you'd have to pay them. But if they're only going and they're going to work for a client for a couple hours and then leave, then you probably would be fine just sticking with the Concord rules.
Thank you.
I actually have another question. It was in the very beginning of your presentation.
Mhm.
You talked about required docs for new hires.
Yes.
Like I-9s, I think you mentioned one of those. What about for current employees under 5, current employees? Do I need to make sure that they have the most current docs up to date if they were hired at a different time?
Well, I think the I-9 goes back to the 90s or something. So yeah, you should have an I-9. You should have one on file. You don't have to redo one if you have one on file, but you do want to make sure that they're correct. So if you were to look at them and say, oh, I'm missing signatures, in that case, you just want to correct them and then attach a memo to them saying that while auditing, we realized this was incorrect and we've corrected it on this date. So that if anyone were to audit, they would say, okay, yeah, that it has been corrected. In terms of the other forms that you would need to do, the 2810 form, which is the wage notice, that should be given out to any hourly employee. And if you do a Google search for LC 2810, then it should come up and there's a PDF form that the state provides. And you just want to give that to an hourly employee anytime you make a change in their hourly rate. And then the other one is the termination form, and that only happens when they terminate.
Even a wage increase?
A wage increase, you want to do the 2810 form, yes.
Okay, good to know.
But that's only for hourly employees. You don't have to do that for exempt salaried employees.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah, have you had questions coming up with this new ARPA and COBRA requirements, et cetera?
Yeah, we're starting to get questions. It is definitely a confusing thing to work through, but basically making sure a lot of times, excuse me, there are certain documents that need to be sent out. So if you, but the thing to remember is that as of right now, it doesn't affect CalCOBRA, it only affects COBRA. So if you have over 20 employees, then you're on federal COBRA. If you have less than that, then you're on CalCOBRA. And on CalCOBRA, also all of that's covered by the carriers, so they would take care of all the notifications. But for federal COBRA, yes, you want to make sure that you go through anybody that was terminated in the last year. If they were terminated because of COVID, that you're sending out the notifications for that.
Okay, any other questions? No? All right, well, you do have Sarah's information on the screen, and we'll be sure to send it out with the event contact list. So if you have any questions for Sarah, you can go ahead and email her or call her, and she's great at responding, so she'll get back to you shortly as well. But we will have a recording of this on Facebook Live as well. So if you want to review this information, it'll live there, and we'll also send everyone a link so you have it for your resources. But with that, I'd like to say thank you to Sarah again for taking the time and being a part of our speaker series. That was a lot of great information for our businesses to hear. We do have a couple of events coming up. We do have our final speaker series on May 4th, and that is all about having your business on Google, how to increase your SEO, what type of information you should have on Google. And that is on May 4th at, sorry, I'm checking the time. We have had so many events, all my times are gathered together. May 4th at 11 a.m. And that registration is going out in all of our emails, and it's on our website. So if you're interested in that, you can register there. And of course, then coming up, we have our First Friday coffees, women's groups, all of that you can find on the website. But I do want to remind everyone that on Monday, the 26th, so this coming Monday at 8 a.m., the applications for the City of Concord Measure V commercial rent relief program does open, and that is open for 19 days. So if you know of any small businesses that qualify for that, Amanda's putting some links in the chat and we'll send it out as well. There's some eligibility requirements. The small business and the landlord do have to work together. So you can go into the City of Concord's website to find all those requirements. And we also hosted a webinar yesterday for the businesses and the landlords with some great Q&A. So we have a recording of that going out as well. But everything is on our website. You guys know where to find us if you have any questions, and I hope to see you guys in an event soon. Thank you again, Sarah, for hosting us.